Holocaust Inversion and Contemporary Antisemitism by Lesley Klaff. Little introduction here. It says, one of the cruellest aspects of the new anti-Semitism is its perverse use of the Holocaust as a stick to beat, quote, the Jews, end quote. Lesley Klaff explains the phenomenon of, quote, Holocaust inversion, end quote. In 2013, the Liberal Democrat MP for Bradford East, David Ward, after signing the Book of Remembrance in the House of Parliament on Holocaust Memorial Day, made use of the Holocaust to criticize Israel, end quote, the Jews, end quote, by equating Israel with Nazi Germany, and to characterize the Holocaust as a moral lesson from which, quote, the Jews, end quote, have failed to learn. David Ward wrote, quote, having visited Auschwitz twice, once with my family and once with local schools, I am saddened that the Jews who suffered unbelievable levels of persecution during the Holocaust could within a few years of liberation from the death camps be inflicting atrocities on Palestinians in the new state of Israel and continue to do so on a daily basis in the West Bank and Gaza, end quote. David Ward. What has been called, quote, Holocaust inversion, end quote, involves an inversion of reality. The Israelis are cast as the, quote, new Nazis and the Palestinians as the, quote, new Jews, and an inversion of morality. The Holocaust is presented as a moral lesson for, or even a moral indictment of, quote, the Jews. More, those who object to these inversions are told, as they were by David Ward, that they are acting in bad faith, only being concerned to deflect criticism of Israel. In short, the Holocaust, an actual event accurately described by Dan Diner as a, quote, rupture in civilization, or Dan Diner is probably actually Dan Diner as a, quote, rupture in civilization, end quote, organized by a regime that, as the political philosopher Leo Strauss observed, quote, had no other clear principle except murderous hatred of the Jews, end quote, is now being used instrumentally as a means to express animosity towards the homeland of the Jews. Quote, the victims have become perpetrators, end quote, is being heard more and more. That is Holocaust inversion. The inversion of reality and morality. Clemens Henny, the German political scientist and director of the Berlin International Center for the Study of Antisemitism, believes that the equation of Israel/the Jews/Zionism with Nazism amounts to a, quote, inversion of truth, end quote, which is used today as a form of, quote, extremely aggressive anti-Jewish propaganda, end quote. Anthony Julius, author of a landmark study of British anti-Semitism, notes that Holocaust inversion is becoming part of the iconography of a new anti-Semitism. Headlines such as "The Final Solution to the Palestinian Question," references to the, quote, Holocaust in Gaza, end quote, images of IDF soldiers morphing into jackbooted stormtroopers, Israeli politicians morphing into Hitler, and the Star of David morphing into the swastika are all increasingly common. The 2009 report of the European Institute for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism, Understanding the quote, Nazi card, Intervening Against Anti-Semitic Discourse, reported that equating Israel with the Nazis is an important component of incitement and racial aggravation against Jews in the UK today. The report recommended that the Home Office, the Association of Chief Police Officers, and the Crown Prosecution Service prepare guidance for the police on whether the use of Holocaust imagery to refer to contemporary Israeli policy amounts to incitement of racial hatred against Jews. Comparing Israel and the Nazi regime, David Ward said, quote, don't forget, long before the death camps were set up, the treatment of Jews in Nazi Germany was racist, nastiness and harassment to begin with and then escalated. And when you look at it, wherever it may be, the West Bank, and a declared intent by the Israeli forces to harass, often just annoy Palestinians, in terms of a checkpoint that will be open on certain days, and then it will be open but at a later time, and the next day it will open slightly earlier, so you get there and it's been shut again, ... really just to harass, in many cases to move the Palestinians from land, to just give up and move on, ... end quote. Now, whether or not IDF soldiers deliberately changed the opening and closing times of checkpoints in the West Bank in order to harass Palestinians, I do not know. But even if they do, no matter how wrong that would be, there is absolutely no equivalence between that and the denial of paid work, Jew baiting, herding into ghettos, incarceration, disease, and starvation in labor camps that occurred in Germany and Eastern Europe between 1933 and the Holocaust. Not only is there no historical equivalence between the two, there is no moral equivalence either. The historian Deborah Lipstadt, author of Denying the Holocaust, The Growing Assault on Truth and Memory, and successful defendant in the libel suit brought against her and Penguin Books by the Holocaust denier David Irving, has used the term, quote, softcore denial, end quote, to highlight the damage done by Holocaust inversion. The false equivalence of Israel and the Nazis, she says, quote, elevates by a factor of a zillion any wrongdoings Israel might have done and lessens by a factor of a zillion what the Germans did, end quote. And as Anthony Julius points out, the Zionist equals Nazi trope not only says to the world that the, quote, Zionists are to the Palestinians what Nazis were to the Jews, end quote, but also that, quote, the quote, Zionists, end quote, and Nazis share the same fascist ideology, end quote, and that, quote, the, quote, Zionists, end quote, were complicit with the Nazis in the Holocaust, end quote. The, quote, anti-Zionist, end quote, writers, Hazem Zaghia and Saleh Bashir, published an article in 1998 universalizing, that's the title of it being, universalizing the Holocaust, which makes clear the moral inversion involved in Holocaust inversion. Quote, the dissociation between the acknowledgement of the Holocaust and what Israel is doing should be the starting point for the development of a discourse which says that the Holocaust does not free the Jewish state or Jews of accountability. On the contrary, the Nazi crime compounds the Jews and the Jewish state's moral responsibility and exposes them to greater answerability. They are the ones who have escaped the ugliest crime in history, and now they are perpetrating reprehensible deeds against another people, end quote. Holocaust inversion, then, involves the abuse of the Holocaust memory to issue a moral stricture aimed at Israel and, quote, the Jews, end quote, imposing upon them a uniquely onerous moral responsibility and accountability in their treatment of others. The accusation of, quote, bad faith, end quote. Criticized for his Holocaust Memorial Day comments, David Ward hit back by accusing his critics of bad faith. Quote, there is a huge operation out there, a machine almost, which is designed to protect the state of Israel from criticism. And that comes into play very, very quickly and focuses intensely on anyone who's seen to criticize the state of Israel. And so I end up looking at what happened to me, whether I should use this word, whether I should use that word, and that is winning for them, end quote. This is an example of the, quote, Livingstone formulation, end quote, a term coined by David Hirsch to refer to the practice of responding to claims of contemporary antisemitism by alleging that those making the claim are only doing so to prevent Israel from being criticized. In other words, they are, quote, playing the anti-Semitism card, end quote. Ward's statement is a perfect illustration of the Livingstone formulation because while Ward claims that an ad hominem attack is being made on him by a, quote, huge operation out there, a machine almost, end quote, it is, in fact, he who is making an ad hominem attack on those who question him. Rather than a, quote, huge operation, end quote, deflecting criticism of Israel, it is actually Ward who is deflecting legitimate concerns about anti-Semitism in the form of the Holocaust inversion. By inverting reality and morality, and by recklessly spreading accusations of bad faith, Holocaust inversion prevents us identifying the changing nature of contemporary anti-Semitism and is an obstacle to marshalling active resistance to it. And it has a little list here of further reading. Robert Fine, who is a member at one point of Alliance for Workers' Liberty, wrote a good book on cosmopolitanism, and also has pieces in one of the Open Marxism books. And I have a whole book by Robert Fine on here on Marxism and the rule of law. Anyway, the piece they have listed here is Fighting with Phantoms, a contribution to the debate on anti-Semitism in Europe. Patterns of Prejudice 43. Manfred Gerstenfeld, 2007. Holocaust Inversion, the portraying of Israel and Jews as Nazis. Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Clemens Henny, quote, Secondary Anti-Semitism, from Hardcore to Softcore Denial of the Shoah. David Hirsch, Accusations of Malicious Intent in Debates about the Palestine-Israel Conflict and about Anti-Semitism. And Paul Igonsky and Abe Swery, Understanding the, quote, Nazi Card, end quote, Intervening Against Anti-Semitic Discourse. Report of the European Institute for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism. And Anthony Julius, Trials of the Diaspora, A History of Anti-Semitism in England. The end.